Hi, I'm Jason Martorino.
Hi, I'm Jason Rajagulsingam.
We're a couple of elementary school educators with the Toronto District School Board, and we are here because we are concerned with some of the cuts that are going to be imposed by the current Conservative government.
So we're going to be talking to MPP Peter Tabuns, who's a former education critic and an ally of educators and parents and teachers. So the Ford government has claimed they have made an unprecedented investment in public education, but if you take the spin off of it, it looks like the numbers with inflation in mind, the funding has actually decreased by 3% from the last year. What is the goal of a government that is willing to misrepresent numbers like this?
Well, this is not a government that's driven by fact. I mean, let's just be clear with all the cards on the table, because I'm in the House listening to these guys all the time. Facts are not part of their universe. They're salespeople. They're selling an ideological perspective. They're selling a political perspective. And as I've said before, they don't think it's a good idea that people are paid well. They oppose the increase in the minimum wage. They brought in this cap on the increase in salaries for public servants, which is unconstitutional, and I think eventually will be thrown out in court. But they don't like people being paid decently. Facts get in their way, and no one should be surprised that they just make it up as they go along. I think it's a risk for them because people in Ontario, because we have an education system, know how to read and they know how to calculate, and they can figure out that they're being given a bunch of junk. But don't be surprised with these guys just selling really a con job.
So Peter, I just want to ask you about Regulation 274 and your thoughts on it about fair hiring practices.
When we were dealing with that issue at the time, I wasn't in government, I was the critic. But I talked to a lot of teachers, I talked to a lot of vocational teachers, I talked to your teacher leadership. And there were recurrent issues with favoritism that were coming up, where people were not able to get jobs because principals had connections with other candidates. And teachers wanted this so that there was more fairness in the system, so that people would not effectively be locked out of getting their first job because someone else had a better connection. And I've always felt that connections were a bad basis for hiring people. It's just the reality. So there's nothing that anyone ever does that doesn't have some problem in a different direction or side effects. But on the whole, it seems to have eliminated this whole question of favoritism and people getting jobs because they have connections. And my understanding as well is that teachers bargain for it, and it's part of a negotiated agreement. So if the government wants to change that, well, they need to negotiate with teachers. I know that the one thing that some teachers don't like is the difficulty in moving from one school board to another and how it affects their seniority. And it may be that between teachers and government there can be an approach found that satisfies all of the different needs. But for the moment, it seems to work well. It eliminates a problem that was identified. And in the end, it has to be negotiated with the teachers. It can't just be imposed.
The last thing I kind of want to talk about is the recent passing of Bill 124, which basically states, as I'm sure you know, that there's going to be a wage increase stoppage on public service employees for the next 3 years. It's going to be frozen at 1%, whereas Statistics Canada has shown that inflation is at 2.24%. So we're going to be well below that for a few years. And this in addition to cuts to kindergarten, reduction of funds that will mean lower class sizes, and cuts to special education programs. Now, economists have shown that for every dollar you invest in education, you get $1.30 of economic productivity back for the province. What is behind a government that would make these kind of cuts when the numbers don't actually pan out and economists don't agree that that is productive?
Well, don't assume that this is a government that acts based on facts. There are a few things I think are going on here. We do have a deficit. One that this government is not addressing, and just as an example, they're subsidizing hydro rates by $2.5 billion a year. And if the actual deficit is around $9 billion a year, they don't need to be subsidizing hydro rates. They need to phase that out. We have the money if we need the money, and they are not interested in actually dealing with that. So I just set that one aside for the moment.
Okay.
So one argument they make is we need to address the deficit. Something they could do in other ways, and they're not doing it. And instead they're going after people who work in education. Two, in general, they see the public sector as bad news. They don't like civil servants. They don't like public sector workers. They see them as privileged and overpaid. Even though, as you're well aware, this is a government of a millionaire, in favor of millionaires, going after people who spend a lot of time getting an education and developing a professional skill so they could deliver a service that we see as essential. So they don't like higher wages overall, and they certainly don't like them in the public sector. This is a government that is in favor of a low-wage economy, and unionized civil servants who are paid decently is something that's an affront to them. But the third thing that's going on that I think is very real is the drive to start undermining the public system so that private schools and private education interests can expand their market share in Ontario. The September after the Ford government was elected was the first time in my, not forever, but 13 years in government, that I had ever seen advertising from private schools saying, you know, you need to change the financial system so you're financing these private schools because they deliver really high quality education and it doesn't undermine public schools. And they understood the potential for opening up the market. So to the extent that the public schools are under-resourced, that there's conflict, that parents are worried, that increases the interest in private schools and the openings for private schools. They don't like public investment. They don't like public services. They like private sector delivery of these services. And undermining publicly funded education is completely consistent with that.